Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, Trick Slattery, wsdtime, Michael Laster, and Jamie Soden, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the distinction between having a free choice or free will and having morality. Because for a lot of people, they think that being moral or immoral it requires free will belief. It requires that you be responsible for your own choices. But that's not the way all of us see it. There's still a discussion to be had about morality. People may have different ideas of morality, but just because free will does not exist does not mean that there's not that cancels out morality necessarily. Some of us talk about morality being based on pleasure and pain, and that's what I currently hold to. Perhaps each of us we can explain the difference between morality and moral responsibility because there is a huge difference. I mean, I could, or would anybody else like to start?
To me, morality is based on like the pain and pleasure principle, but ultimately, like, isn't morality something that we, like humans, just made a concept of? Because there is no perfect being or God telling us what to do. So where does that leave morality? Where does that leave quote unquote right and wrong? Ultimately, like, right and wrong um, depends on what causes suffering to another person, right?
Jamie, I think, while there may be, it may not be a perfect definition, I think for all extents and purposes, that basically explains, what morality is about. Something that's immoral tends to, increase pain and suffering. Something that's moral tends to lessen it.
Hmm.
I'm back.
Yeah,
Right.
but I
So
think
in
like, I
oh, go
think
ahead.
Chandler mentioned before he started the podcast is that free will is very like tied in with the whole morality stuff, right?
For a lot of people, it seems to be. They haven't separated the two yet.
Yeah. So there's different moral theories out there. There's utilitarianism, which we're kind of what we're talking about, which is basically, with the concern over pleasure and pain and things like that.
Hmm.
And then there's deontology, which is like just a rule-based morality, and then there's virtue ethics, where what's moral is what's virtuous, what is in your character. So these are like the three main types of moral systems, and the one that's really compatible with not having free will is the utilitarian variety, because it's more just forward looking, where you're concerned about the future, you're concerned about what's going to happen in the future and what are the causal things that we could do to affect that future in a way that you know reduces suffering and things like that. Um, but that doesn't mean that we're morally responsible after the fact, and that's the main difference. When we say we don't have free will and we've done something, say we've done something immoral, we can look at that and say, oh, that person did this immoral thing. This is how we would fix that problem, so it doesn't happen in the future. But we can't really apply moral blameworthiness onto that person in the strong sense of they should be punished or things like that, unless we're talking about how we're going to affect the future, how we're going to change the future. It's because they don't really deserve it, because that's just their causality, their causal luck, basically.
Yeah, and that's where objective morality comes in when people are blaming each other and saying that they have free will and stuff.
Well, well, personally, I think morality is objective, because we can objectively look at things such as suffering and pleasure, and objectively um,
Yeah, we know pain and pleasure
rationally
exists.
conclude what types of actions might lead to the better outcome, basically.
That's true. We can, say if we want to alleviate suffering, we can do this, but it doesn't give us the ought. I don't think it doesn't tell us why we ought to do that, and I
Right.
think it takes a moral person to say, I actually care about how someone else feels. I care about someone else's suffering. since maybe I can relate to that in some way or see myself in them. But I think the idea of morality being objective or subjective is sort of irrelevant when it comes to the larger question of what'll keep things from descending into chaos if the belief in free will were dismantled. And I think that if you were to release a bunch of wild animals, carnivorous, lions into the streets of New York, you'd try to remove them without blaming them, since in fact that's what they're expected to do. And as I was saying before, the same is true for for many of the criminals who can't be deterred with the current legal system we have. Like there would still be things in place that would try and remove them from society, either temporarily or permanently, and that would not go away.
Exactly, and I think the fact that we can understand that we don't have free will kind of gives us more compassion for those variables. So it's like when you have a rabid dog. Have a rabid dog, and you have to put that dog down because it's rabid and dangerous, and you can't fix it. We actually feel sorry for the dog. We don't blame the dog for being rabid or for trying to bite people. We say, oh, it's a shame that we have to put this dog down, but we have to do it because he's too much of a danger, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, we don't even have to kill people. We just can remove them
Right,
from
exactly.
society.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can imprison them because prison's enough to, stop them from hurting another person. So why should we kill them or torture them?
Yeah.
Right.
See, because we can all agree that some animals, humans included, are more dangerous than other animals, but they didn't make themselves be what they are. They didn't choose to be rabid or whatever their condition is that makes them violent.
Right. So you can have somebody that does things that are immoral, but that doesn't mean they could have done otherwise. So that's kind of why the distinction between morality and the moral responsibility. And that's a big
Okay, yeah,
distinction in
yeah.
philosophy is you have morality and then you have moral responsibility after the fact. Those are two different things that you could talk about, and they often get conflated. Like the people that you were talking about, Chandler, they would conflate those two things and say, oh well, morality can't exist then without free will.
Yeah, and it's beyond that trick because it's been a trend in more recent times. I was talking about this with Quaid in a recent podcast about how people have accepted moral relativism, that there is no absolutes. You can't tell someone what they did is wrong. And so people have accepted that, and they've basically are saying that there is no morality already, and yet at the same time, here's the fun part. They're still believing that they have a moral responsibility and that they deserve things, even though they are saying that morality is bunk.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
that's a
That
different
makes
topic
sense.
altogether. If you want, the moral relativity versus moral objectivity, that's a big topic, and it kind of goes into what Michael was talking about the is-ought gap and things like that, and people concluding relativism based on that type of thing, which I think is a mistake personally. I have my own structure for more of an objective morality, but that's a big topic. so that
Yeah, it
it
most
moves.
certainly is a big topic. And so here's a question that I have for all of you guys. When we're discussing the free will thing with someone, and then somebody tries to get into morality, what approach do we take with that? Do we just point out, well, we're talking about moral responsibility, but we're not talking about morality, or do we go down the ethical bunny trail with them?
I think you should start there. I think you should start with make the distinction between morality and moral responsibility, and then the other thing is the distinction between determinism and fatalism, because a lot of times they'll conflate those two and they'll think that when someone's asserting there's no free will, we're saying we're suggesting fatalism, which is more defeatist. It's more where you can't change the outcome. Basically, you have no say on your conscious thoughts and actions have no say on the outcome of the future. Whereas for determinism, your conscious thoughts and actions play a part of the causality that lead to the future outcome. So they're, they're important. They're not futile, as in fatalism. So and that's like the main thing. Like when you look at those studies, for example, that show that people that are shown like temporarily that they don't have free will, they tend to cheat more, or things like that. That it's always based on this idea that of fatalism, where they intuit fatalism first. So it's a kind of an education process that we have to do for people, is to educate them out of their bad. Basically, it's free will thinking. So they have this free will thinking that leads to this fatalistic notion that of if there's no free will, then fatalism is the next thing. But that's not necessarily the case.
Right. And see, here's what's interesting about it. They're sort of deterministically challenged here. Because, first of all, people who are believing in free will are often ignorant that their choices are caused by things of which they're not aware and that they can't possibly control. And so, then as soon as somebody tries to suggest there's no free will, then they still view things as happening but not happening causally. So they sort of get into some kind of randomistic fatalism, is what it seems to happen with these people.
Yeah. I think.
Yeah, again, also like with morality, fine, it exists. It's just not our morality. We can't be held fundamentally responsible for what we do. But again, I guess what people are concerned with is that we're still, the agents that need to be addressed, for either deterrence or rehabilitation. And I think once we get that out for a lot of people, I think people will accept it more. Now, here's the thing. Now, all right, most of you guys, or perhaps all of you, are atheists. 80, 90% of our audience believe in God. So, in terms of morality, this one of our challenges is, all right, fine. If we human beings don't have a free will, that means you can't blame us for the wrong we do. But in their minds, that means they have to blame God. So, how do we respond to that? I think that's a very, very strong barrier to people accepting our message.
Yeah, well, what's very interesting about it is, yeah, George, you're right, because what people do is that, they use free will as the reason that, well, all the evil is the fault of humans. It can't be God's fault because humans have a free will. So as soon as that's removed,
Evil.
then they tend to think, oh, well, then it makes God look pretty immoral to him all of a sudden.
Yeah, but in reality, I mean, when it comes to the free will topic, it's illogical either way. So God having free will is logically impossible as well. So you can't really blame God either,
Right.
at least
And
at least
Right.
logically anyway. But
No,
yeah,
you're right, but that's you Trick. You're right, but that's like a kind of like an advanced logic that that it might take a while for. Maybe we have to present that also. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
well,
let.
actually, George, I don't think that that's too much of an advanced concept because it directly follows. If you can't blame people,
well,
you can't blame God either, even if a God existed.
I think they might have a problem with saying that God doesn't have free will, right? Because God's supposed to be all powerful and things like that. So if God doesn't have free will, how could he be all powerful?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's the same type of thing, right?
Well, yeah, it is sort of a definitional problem there because we know that if there was a God, any choices that God made would have to be either causal or acausal, and neither makes God the originator of it.
Right.
Yeah, but when I was talking about like objective morality, I was talking about more like divine command theory, where like without a perfect being telling us what to do, where does that leave objective morality? You know?
Well, Jamie, I have a response for that actually, because you have to have the standard of morality set to define what a perfect being would be.
Yeah, but a perfect being wouldn't do any evil at all, would they? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. See, you already know that morality like is based on pleasure and pain, and so a perfect being that was really powerful, like a god, would be able to basically cause no pain and cause lots of pleasure.
Constantly accelerating so he doesn't get bored of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah. Um, what was I gonna say? But I don't know if thinking about morality, like as a in this binary way, like either it's subjective or maybe it's objective, is the most helpful way of looking at it. I think maybe there are gradients between subjective and objective, and people have proposed the term intersubjective to show that yes, it's something that's happening within the mind of individuals, but it's so shared, and it's such a part of our reality as humans that it's just beyond subjective. It's intersubjective.
Right. Yeah, and I hate using those words like, and it's a constant battle is with this word subjective and objective because they're so
Right.
ambiguous that they're very problematic words. I actually refer to like objective morality as moral realism, basically saying that there's something real that exists that has moral worth, basically.
Right. Even
So,
though it wouldn't be on the same pedestal as, math or logic.
Yeah. There are things that do objectively cause suffering, though, and those are the things to avoid.
Right.
Yeah, here's the way I look at it is I view morality as a system of math in a sense that there's pleasure and pain and that there is a right answer to the math problem of how do you minimize the pain and maximize the pleasure. There is a right answer, but we may not always have all the information to know what is the right answer.
Yeah, but Chandler, without free will, they don't have a choice whether to be moral or not. You see what I mean?
That's true, but those who are moral will use the evidence they have available and
right.
previous experiences to make the better moral decisions. That's what
Right. So
I'm saying.
so what yeah, so what Chandler's saying is there is an action that is the better, more moral action, but whether people actually do that action is determined. Like they don't really have a choice, like
You mean
a
informed
free
decision?
choice, right? Whether they act the most moral way or a lesser moral way or an immoral way, right?
Yeah,
So
there are such things as informed decisions. I mean, there's a bad decision which could be incredibly stupid or hurtful to another person, and then there's a educated or informed decision which could be helpful to
right.
society in general.
So when with the free will illusion, we have to our moral system changes. It no longer is about blaming people. It's
Yeah.
always just a forward-looking mechanism that says, well, this is what we saw, and this is how we can fix those problems in the future, potentially.
Right.
Right? So that it becomes a more forward progressive type of moral system rather than a backward looking one where we're looking at people and saying and pointing fingers, right?
Yeah,
And
and
now I'm wondering how much there would have to be a sort of revolution in language, like the ideas of right and wrong are sort of loaded terms.
right, and
Um,
Michael, I was just about to address that in terms of blaming. We would replace blaming with identifying. We don't blame
Right.
someone for anything. We identify them as the agent that needs to be addressed.
yes,
Yes, that's a good way of
absolutely.
putting it.
But you were saying like, so how does this relate? How would our concepts of morality and right and wrong also need to be amended?
It would be probably reterming good and bad as maybe efficient or inefficient towards certain goals.
Okay, well that might be beyond the scope of the free will mission in the sense that, like I think we were saying before, like, that, as Chandler was saying, sometimes we don't know, we can't know what the right is versus the wrong. But I think where that relates is like in terms of responsibility. We can no longer hold anyone fundamentally responsible. I don't know if holding people pragmatically responsible is enough of a change, or we need to like completely go to a different word than responsibility.
All I gotta say is I prefer to use words that only have one meaning. That would be a nice language.
No such language.
I wish, man.
No such thing.
Yep. No such thing.
Yeah, but yeah, so the word responsibility, that's an ambiguous word, right? So people could take responsibility like as in they feel a moral duty, and that's perfectly, aligns with uh, a lack of free will. It's just you're just taking on your own responsibility. But then there's the backward looking type moral responsibility where the person did something wrong and then they're to blame for that, and that's the type that we're saying doesn't really work very well.
But it also means that since this is forward looking and really sort of goal based, it really, we're sort of forced to take the ought out of the equation unless, it starts with a proposition like, if I want to achieve this, what ought I do? And then you could look at it in a totally objective, pragmatic way. Um, but it's harder to answer why questions as to why should I care for this person.
Well,
That's why I think morality is more intersubjective, because it's something that most people share. Most, functional, well, that's not true, but most
Yeah.
right,
people sort of agree upon.
Michael, I think there's two ways to approach the ought. The one I think that we are more in touch with is from the standpoint of compassion. We empathize with other people, and we want other people to experience as much happiness and as little suffering as possible, right? So that's the morality. But then I think ought can also be addressed from a purely selfish standpoint. For those of us who haven't evolved to having that kind of compassion toward others, then I think we can make the case that to the extent that they help alleviate suffering in others, help others to become happier through overcoming this free will myth, it will be easier for them to achieve greater happiness. They'll be able to achieve greater happiness with less effort because other people are going to be, happy, and happier people tend to create a happier world.
Yeah,
Well,
I actually think that morality has to move out of this idea that it's being defined by what one ought to do. So I think morality is descriptive rather than prescriptive. And then if you using your if there, Mike, if someone is to be ethical or moral, they ought do what is descriptively moral. So I think that's where the is-ought gap actually should reside, and that's part of the case that I make. But
yeah, I'm still wondering though, like what would, you know, there's George's compassion argument, but do you have, a case for why someone ought to be moral in general? Because
okay,
it really seems to keep coming back to self-interest. Like, because is morality like a disposition or like a virtue, or is it like a certain behavior, even if your intention isn't there?
right. Well, like I said, I think morality, and I think we're kind of going off target here, but I think morality can be described by this, and what I would call intrinsic value, which is pain and suffering and those type of things, which are descriptive of the world, of the badness inherent in conscious experiences. And I think we could describe the actions that lead to or away from those things, but at the same time, whether one ought to do that, it is based on whether they value being ethical. It's the same thing with logic, for example. Whether someone cares to be logical, someone doesn't have to be logical, right? But so what case can you give them to be logical if they don't care about being logical? They have to value using logic first. So it's the same type of thing.
I might like to add that perhaps there's no pure logical reason for doing anything, but that everything is desire and goal driven.
Yeah,
Right.
and there's the argument. There's actually no altruism. Altruism is like kind of a love of humanity, right? But think about it. anybody who's an altruist, really, they're doing that because it makes them feel good, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, in a certain sense, all of our actions have a selfish kind of like foundation, but as long as we're just, basically, satisfying our desire for happiness by, for example, as Jeremy Bentham wrote, providing the greatest happiness for the greatest number, then that's a moral happiness.
Yeah, and George, even if altruism is ultimately selfish and an altruist does good things because it makes them happy, if it's making other people happy as well, then that's a good person to have around, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of someone who's like, investing in stocks that are, or companies that are doing harm to the environment, doing harm to certain countries, but they're profiting off of it,
Right.
and they really don't care. How, how can we tell them that they ought not to do that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
that
see your struggle there, Mike, because
and
that's
Michael, yeah, that's the basis of our laws. In other words, all of our laws are designed to prevent people from doing things selfishly in ways that hurt others.
You think? No, I think
Well,
in economics in the financial industry, it's sort of the other way around.
all right, no, I hear you. In other words, like that's how law is supposed to be. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, like I said, I don't think you. I mean, I don't think you can tell them what they ought to do if they don't care about other people, but you can say that it's still immoral either way. So you could say that it's an immoral action, even if they don't care about the prescription. It's the same thing like if you prescribe, say, somebody a pill for their disease. If they reject that prescription and say, I don't want the prescription, I don't care if I ought to take it, I don't want it, and they die of their disease, that doesn't mean that the pill isn't the prescription. The pill is still the or this pill is still the cure for the disease, right? So
Right.
so it's descriptively the cure for the disease, even if someone rejects the prescription. So same thing with what you said about this person rejecting what they ought to do.
And I just wanted to pull it back a bit to the free will thing. So, like, basically, what we're doing is like the free will belief um, intensifies the amount of punishment that people feel is justified to correct an
I'll talk to y'all
offense.
later. I'm going to bed.
See
All
ya.
right, WC,
All
yep.
right, see.
All right.
So again, to the extent people believe in free will, they go beyond what's necessary in our laws and in our rules to deter unproductive behavior and to reform people who need to like understand the errors of their ways. It goes beyond what's necessary and inflicts more pain that is necessary to achieve the job. And I'm guessing, there was a study done like in, well, what happened was in England, they had very, very punitive laws for the most minor things. You steal a loaf of bread, you get you know, a year in prison. I'm just using an example. I don't know if that was the case, but anyway, they decided to um, to lessen the penalties for a variety of crimes, right? And many people were saying, "Oh, this is like this, this is like a huge mistake. That's just going to like make crime increase like so much." And interestingly, what happened is, as, after they did that, crime actually decreased. So so
Yeah.
we're
I
so yeah.
find that very interesting. Like, how do I explain how that would work?
I think we see that in a lot of other countries too. Like I think in Norway they have very minimal like their jail facilities, for example, are kind of like dormitories, you know. But yet they have one of the lower crime rates.
Right, Chandler, let me take a guess. Let's say like you're living in a country where the law is you steal a loaf of bread, you get 5 years in prison, right? Now, a lot of people are going to say, my God, this is an evil government that we're living under, so that their laws don't deserve respect. They're evil laws by evil people, you know. So whereas like if the laws the punishments fit the crime, you steal a loaf of bread, I don't know, something far, far less, then people say, all right, that's just. I can live by this law, and so I don't feel any kind of like, moral compulsion to break it, to go against these evil people who are creating laws.
I think that's a pretty good explanation. It might be true there because it's sort of like if somebody has like two parents and one parent is very punitive and they just punish them whenever the child does something they don't like. The other one seems more just. It seems like their rules are for the benefit of the child. They're not so harsh, and so they end up liking that other parent more, and therefore they're more likely to obey them than the one that punishes them more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also makes the process of rehabilitation go a lot smoother. When you like if you look at the criminal system that you have in the U.S., you basically you go to jail and you get raped by men in jail, and it's just it's a horrible experience to go to jail in the U.S. You don't want to go there, but at the same time, those people don't get rehabilitated. What happens is when they get out, they're worse criminals than when they first came in there because of what they had to go through in the prison system itself. So it doesn't work.
Yeah. And isn't that because people believe in free will that they figure the person just by their own free will can just choose to get over their criminality or something?
Right. So segueing back just briefly to the Daily Kos thing. So in terms of morality, what are our overarching messages like politically that the free will belief is destructive because it does what?
Well, it causes us to hurt people based on feeling that they deserve it or something.
And doesn't it justify hatred? In other words, like there's certain groups that are against other groups. Whether it's the rich against the poor, native, citizens against aliens from other countries or whatever. That this free will belief. I mean, not in all cases, of course, because some things aren't related to free will, but doesn't it kind of like provide a foundation for this pitting of group against group.
Yeah, and it
Population.
all stems from the belief that they could have done otherwise, or that they could be otherwise, and that they made the wrong choice. It all stems from that.
All right, so let me ask you something like this. I'm not sure if this is something to promote on Daily Kos. If we word it in the right way, it could be. But so we've got the angle fine. It'll help the progressive cause to overcome this free will. If we could come up with ways how we could also help the conservatives, to whatever extent they have, you know, moral values they want to like champion, we might actually get on a conservative side also, start pitching it to them.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, we could actually say, well, these principles actually are effective for society. I can't think of anything specifically, as far as conservative principles, but
Yeah,
I'm sure, a broken clock is right twice a day, so.
Well, here's another thing that's kind of interesting is what was said earlier was about blaming someone for making the wrong choice. Well, here's the deal. I think part of what's interesting is that while the free will thing and the morality thing are separate, both of them are deeply connected to this whole politics and religion and blaming thing. Because you not only have to believe that someone could have done otherwise, but that the thing that they did was wrong in order to blame them. So it's both of these things combined that make this so deadly.
excellent point,
That's a
Chandler.
great
Excellent.
point.
Yeah.
So do we answer your question, Chandler? I mean, do you
Um,
have an idea of what to respond to people if they ask you about morality and without free will?
well, I think I do have some better ideas now how I might handle the approach of what I do with people, because I might ask them, do you want to discuss about free will or the morality thing, because they're not the same thing. And also, I'll have to explain the difference between determinism and fatalism, as I've already been trying to do,
Yeah,
because I think it's about seeing how these different ideas are separate, but how they're also combined. Because it's not like morality and moral responsibility are completely separate, because they're both related, but you can have one without the other, and vice versa.
exactly.
Except you can't really have free will. You can
And
have the belief of free will.
Yeah, and I was just thinking another way you can respond to them is to turn it to them. Ask them, what do you think, makes for a moral society? And if they don't start talking about God, which is a whole other debate, they'll point to the laws. And you could say, well, why would those laws go away? We're still going to need most of them. In not just to deter people, but to, uh, imprison those who aren't good for society, and to rehabilitate those who can be rehabilitated in a non, blame-based way.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to do, is because far too often what happens is that they'll be like questioning me, and then I'll be responding to each of their questions they ask me, but I forget to ask them questions, the same kind of questions they're asking me about, well, what's your idea about morality? What's your idea of an effective society? All these things. Yeah, these are some real good feedback, guys.
And
Yeah,
Chandler, and if they suggest that a no free will system can't work, just remind them that the medical model, the psychiatric model, uses the non-free will perspective. You don't get like people who are, for example, have Tourette's syndrome being blamed for having Tourette's syndrome, or kleptomaniac being blamed for kleptomania. The medical model, the psychiatric model acknowledges that this stuff isn't up to them, but people still aren't like allowed. People don't have the understanding that therefore they can do whatever they want. In other words, like, so we can still maintain our rules and our laws without at all having to rely on this free will perspective.
Yeah, although I can already see some of the weird stuff that they would try to say, and they'll say, well, the person with Tourette's syndrome has less free will, but other people have more free will. I know how people are. It just never ends.
I hear you.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a little bit stressful, but I feel that it benefits the world when we do explain this to people. It gets a little bit crazy, and so it is about strategizing. What's the most effective ways to explain this? And also, guys, I think it's just generally good for us to talk with each other about these things, because I know we're not even gonna agree about what is the most moral thing or not, but we don't blame each other, and that's always been the top priority, is the benefit that comes when we realize no one's morally responsible.
right. And if they say anything about letting all criminals out or anything weird like that, then bring up the quarantine analogy and say, well, if somebody has a disease that's a contagious disease, we would still quarantine them, even though we don't blame them for having that disease, right? So it's the same type of thing. Matter of fact, that's kind of what we have to replace prison with, is this kind of quarantine analogy.
Yeah,
Excellent. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I guess that about covers it. Was there anything more you guys wanted to say?
I
No,
think
I
I'm
good
can't,
good.
episode,
I
John.
can't think of anything.
Yeah, okay, I guess we're done. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion, and we've been talking about the difference between morality and moral responsibility. How understanding that we don't have a free will doesn't mean that there aren't moral or immoral actions, and it doesn't mean that some people might not be acting more or less morally, but they didn't create themselves and they didn't freely choose how moral they are or not. And that's the important distinction. And the concepts, are kind of interconnected, but they're not identical. And so it's important from time to time to explain the difference for those who are confused. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.